Welcome back, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Great to be diving in again.
Today we're tackling something, well, pretty provocative. We're journeying into the foundations of Western religion and culture.
Yeah, this one definitely challenges some core assumptions.
Our source is Michael Tsarion's Astro-Theology and Sidereal Mythology.
A really dense and intriguing work.
And our mission, really, is to unpack the surprising connections he draws between ancient wisdom, astrology, and the origins of Judeo-Christianity.
And it's all about looking at how symbols and stories we think we know might have completely different older meanings.
Exactly. Expect some, well, illuminating moments, maybe even some aha moments as we go. Okay, so let's jump right in. Tsarion makes this incredibly bold statement right at the start.
He really does. Sets the tone immediately.
He claims, and I'm quoting here, there is not a single element of Judeo-Christian doctrine or dogma that does not originate in the pagan world.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the core premise.
It directly challenges that whole idea of a unique divine revelation, doesn't it?
Completely. It suggests everything's built on something older, something, well, pagan, earthly roots, not exclusively divine ones.
And Tsarion doesn't just leave it there, does he? He builds on this.
No, he contextualizes it. He argues that Jewish and Christian texts are just, full of these pagan motifs, replete with them.
Not just a few similarities here and there.
Not at all. He even brings up attempts, like by some Protestants, to sort of sanitize Christianity, to purge the obvious pagan stuff.
And he says that failed.
Largely failed, yeah. Because, according to him, these elements are so fundamental,
Yeah.
trying to remove them all would be like,
Like what?
tantamount to erasing the religion itself. His words. It suggests they're woven right into the fabric.
That's a massive claim. So what specific things is he pointing to? Can you give us some, concrete examples of this borrowed blueprint?
Absolutely. The source gets quite specific, drawing on other researchers too, like W. Winwood Reed.
Okay.
He talks about the actual clothing, the vestments and ornaments of, say, Roman priests.
These robes and symbols.
Exactly. He claims they're borrowed directly from older heathen traditions, like the surplices, similar to those Phoenician priests wore, or lambskin, like Persian priests used.
Huh. Lambskin.
Yeah. And even stranger, maybe, the canon's pelt, worn first side out. He says that's a throwback to really ancient practices, wearing skins from sacrifices.
Okay, that's quite visceral.
It is. And Russian bishops' garments with little silver bells, paralleled with priests in Persia.
Bells on the robes.
Uh-huh. And maybe the most striking one, the Pope's crozier, that shepherd's staff symbol.
Yeah, very iconic.
Linked directly to symbols used by Druids, the Roman augurs Liduus, even Hindu hieralpha.
So symbols of authority, things central to the practice today.
Presented as having these deep, ancient, non-Christian roots.
Yeah. It really makes you think about the rituals, too. Like, why do Christians bend their knees in prayer? Is there a connection there?
Well, according to Tsarion, yes. When Christians kneel before their Lord, he suggests they're unknowingly echoing a ritual that was sacred to Thoth.
Thoth, the Egyptian god. The ibis-headed one.
That's the one, the moon god. And burying the dead beneath the ground.
Yeah.
He links that to the Assyrian priesthood rites. The idea of traversing the underworld, the duat or amenta, before reaching higher planes.
Emulating an ancient Egyptian journey of the soul.
That's the implication.
Ugh.
And the phrase, born again in the blood of the Lamb,
A very common Christian phrase.
presented as symbolic of the astrological sign Aries, the ram, where the sun is reborn each spring.
An astrological
He
connection.
goes on, the Christmas gatherings, festivals of lights, Easter eggs, even dancing jigs,
All traced back.
all presented as unknowing reproductions of ancient pagan celebrations. And the source kind of laments that the original context, astrology, Sabianism, uranography, is lost on many believers today.
Because
Because, as he puts it, knowledge and understanding are not invited. Their presence would only spoil the fun.
that's a bit cynical, perhaps.
But provocative.
Definitely provocative. Okay, moving from rituals to the actual people in the Bible, Tsarion makes another really surprising claim that major biblical figures were deeply involved with astrology and magic.
Yeah, that's another pillar of his argument. It really disrupts the standard narrative.
How so? Who specifically?
Well, he cites Godfrey Higgins, who, in Anacalypsis, asserted that Abraham wasn't just the founder of the Persians,
Okay.
but also a great magician, the head of the Magi priesthood, and that Abraham actually taught astrology to the Egyptian priests in Heliopolis, or On.
taught the Egyptians. Usually you hear it the other way around.
Exactly. Higgins claimed this was a fact universally asserted by the historians of the East. It paints Abraham in a very different light.
And it's not just Abraham. Are others implicated?
Oh, yes. Daniel, for instance, said to have lived in the Babylonian court, heading up the astrologers, magi, and Chaldeans, both before and after Babylon fell.
So deeply embedded in the esoteric practices of the time.
That's the picture painted. And Tsarion stresses, these are just a few examples, a small sample, he calls it, of these recurring astro-theological and astro-mythological leitmotifs.
Recurring themes.
Yeah, he goes so far as to claim the entire book of Revelation is basically a treatise on astrology.
The whole book.
Yes, only truly understandable by astrologers, something he says prize demonstrated beyond all possible doubt. And he cites Arthur Dyett Thompson, who apparently claimed the entire Bible was a garbled concoction of sidereal lore.
Astronomical knowledge, basically.
Yeah.
Sidereal lore, garbled concoction. Quite the description.
It is, and this view isn't just limited to the canonical Bible.
It extends further.
To the Apocrypha, Gnostic texts, Essene writings. For example, the Essenes.
The group associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right. Noted for having 3 classes of members, like the ancient Irish Magi, 12 bishops, and their leader was called Star. Their scriptures, like the Bible, reportedly based on these astro-theologies of ruined bygone civilizations.
Yeah, and there's archaeological evidence mentioned too.
Yes. Recent excavations of early synagogues in Judea, they've apparently found architecture filled with stars and zodiac symbols.
Which you wouldn't expect in a modern synagogue.
Exactly. It's presented as supporting evidence for these ancient astrological connections within early Judaism.
So if these texts are, as claimed, astrological treatises or garbled concoctions rather than literal history, it just changes everything, doesn't it? How you read them, what you take from them.
Fundamentally,
Yeah.
It shifts the ground completely.
Which leads us right to that core question Tsarion and his sources keep circling back to. Was the Torah written by God or by man?
A critical fork in the road, really. Because if you accept the Orthodox view God wrote it, then its commands are divine, absolutely.
Right, no questioning.
But the source points to R.D. Gold, who highlights this large and growing body of credible evidence, textual, archaeological, and historical, pointing the other way, towards human authorship.
What kind of evidence?
Gold cites Richard Elliott Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible? Friedman apparently lays out methodically why pretty much all non-fundamentalist biblical scholars now agree the Torah had multiple human authors.
Not just one voice, not just Moses, and certainly not directly God.
Right. Friedman supposedly explains who they likely were, when, where, why they wrote different parts, treating it as a complex human document.
And it's not just textual analysis pointing this way. Archaeology comes into play, too.
Definitely. The source brings up Israel Finkelstein, a major biblical archaeologist, and historian Neil Asher Silberman.
Okay.
In their book, The Bible Unearthed, they talk about this widening chasm between the Bible's stories and what modern archaeology has actually found over the last few decades.
So the physical evidence doesn't always match the text?
Or often doesn't, according to them. Plus, William Hallow from Yale, an expert on the ancient Near East, is cited for showing how Torah texts aren't unique, but reflect general customs and laws from that whole region and time period.
Not some isolated special revelation.
That's the conclusion drawn. So, bringing these different fields together, textual criticism, archaeology, regional history, the source says scholars basically arrive at 2 conclusions.
Which are?
First, man wrote the Torah, not God. And second, the stories in it aren't an accurate history of the ancient Jewish people. Not even close is the phrasing used.
That's profoundly challenging to traditional views. It feels like it opens the door to another layer. Tsarion discusses these alleged hidden connections between occult orders and the church itself.
Yes, it shifts from questioning the text's divine origin to questioning the motives and affiliations of the institutions interpreting it.
What's the claim there?
Tsarion argues that senior priests and clergy of Roman and Protestant churches have been at all times closely affiliated with esoteric societies.
At all times. That's a strong statement.
It is. He goes further, suggesting Judeo-Christianity itself is just the exoteric branch, the public face of these elusive esoteric orders.
Meaning there's an inner circle, an inner court versus an outer court.
Exactly. An official doctrine for the masses, and a hidden, perhaps quite different understanding for initiates. He quotes Madame Blavatsky on this.
The Theosophist?
Yes. She apparently described Catholic clergy as adepts of the black art. Not necessarily meaning evil magic, but implying they were deeply learned in secret symbolism, the old religion.
More knowledgeable than academic Orientalists.
100 times more learned is the quote used. She even claimed there were more learned Kabbalists in Rome and across Europe and America than people suspected.
And this hidden knowledge, or perhaps control, is linked to historical actions by the church, like dealing with competing traditions.
Yes, the source cites Conor McDarry's critique of what he called the crime syndicate known as the Christian Church.
Strong language.
Very. McDarry focused on how it allegedly used forcible means against the early Irish church, which he claimed was superior in learning, science, philosophy, and spiritual culture.
Suggesting a suppression of alternative knowledge systems.
That's the implication. And the analysis goes deeper into the psychological aspect, suggesting the whole indoctrination process is designed to create followers who are, well,
how does he put it?
Impotent, subservient, faithful, and tame. Individuals who are suspicious of reason, prefer acceptance over questioning, and are instilled with spiritual fear and guilt.
And the fear of hell and the devil.
Presented as a key tool. The threat of eternal torment secures the priest's position and their psychological dominion. It's framed as a control mechanism.
So it's less about historical accuracy and more about power dynamics and shaping consciousness. And this view extends to specific historical figures.
It does. Martin Luther, for instance. Tsarion claims he belonged to a powerful occult order, something most Protestants aren't supposed to know.
Luther, the father of the Reformation.
That's the claim. And Emperor Constantine, the one often credited with making Christianity mainstream.
Yeah, the Council of Nicaea and all that.
He's said to have remained a pagan sun worshiper his whole life. Part of the Sol Invictus cult, a powerful worldwide solar order.
But wasn't he baptized?
Only on his deathbed, according to this source, and others like Gaston Hallsberg. Before that, his state religion was pagan sun worship, and he was its chief priest. Sol Invictus was apparently on imperial banners, coins, everywhere.
That completely reframes the narrative of how Christianity rose to prominence. And this line of argument goes even further, questioning the historical reality of Jesus himself.
It does. It's perhaps the most radical part. J.C. Blumenfeld is cited, arguing the history of Jesus is a forgery and a fiction.
A forgery?
Yes. Idle tales having no foundation whatever in truth, mere fiction stolen from the mythological fables of ancient nations. He argued if this could be proven, the root of Christianity would be destroyed.
And others support this idea.
Martin A. Larson is mentioned, claiming New Testament books were just derived from various sources, stitched together, and heavily altered for bias and propaganda.
So for you listening, this raises a huge question, doesn't it? What if these core stories are claimed to be fiction stolen from mythological fables? How does that impact your understanding of history, faith, everything? It really pushes us to question, okay, that's a heavy critique of Judeo-Christian origins. So if not unique revelation, where did these foundational ideas, these borrowed blueprints come from? Tsarion points very clearly towards one place.
Yeah, his focus shifts decisively to ancient Egypt. He presents it as the real wellspring of Western culture.
He quotes Picknett and Prince, who asked that question, what if our culture isn't really Judeo-Christian, but should be called Egypto-Christian instead?
It's a fundamental reframing. And Ralph Ellis is cited too, arguing that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are all just different expressions of a single Egyptian heritage.
A single heritage? That's bold.
It is. He notes how many ancient traditions trace back to Egyptian theology. Even Herodotus, the Greek historian.
The father of history.
Right. He's cited saying the Egyptians were the first to figure out the solar year, named the 12 gods concepts the Greeks later adopted. It positions Egypt as the originator.
And this isn't just about calendars and gods' names, is it? It supposedly goes right to the core of Christian belief, like resurrection.
That's right. The source mentions John M. Robinson and Carl Luckert tracing the resurrection concept, Jesus' continued spiritual presence, directly back to Egyptian theology.
Yeah.
Specifically, the Osiris myth.
Osiris, the dying and rising god.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And figures like Ignatius Donnelly, Madame Blavatsky, they argued the Greeks learned pretty much all their important sciences from Egypt. Architecture, the zodiac.
So the Greeks were students, not innovators in this view.
That's the claim. Gerald Massey even argued the Greeks started an ignorant explanation of Egyptian symbols because they couldn't read the hieroglyphics properly. Yeah. A misinterpretation that, he suggests, got passed down through classical scholarship.
And Philo is quoted criticizing the Greeks, too.
Yeah, for bringing a mist upon learning, making truth harder to find.
So it sounds like a combination of borrowing and perhaps misunderstanding, or maybe even deliberate obscuring of the Egyptian origins. What made Egyptian knowledge so special, so foundational?
It seems the source emphasizes their mastery not just of astrology, but of symbolism, the art of conveying deep meaning through images.
How so?
Plotinus, the Neoplatonic philosopher, is brought up. He admired how Egyptians used pictures that weren't just representations, but held symbolic qualities, Sophia or wisdom.
Okay.
These symbols could apparently reveal profound insight into the very essence of substances of things, to someone initiated, someone contemplating them.
Not through logic, but intuition.
Not the result of reasoning or mental reflection, Plotinus said, but acquired spontaneously by means of divine inspiration and illumination. They read the world symbolically.
Which brings us back to that question Tsarion poses. If this is all true, what can Christians claim as their own? What wasn't borrowed from from Egypt?
It's a direct challenge. Albert Churchward is quoted saying, Hebrew writings can be understood through the original Egyptian, that their sanctity is because they were originally Egyptian.
The whole imagery.
That's the claim. Samuel Sharp points to Genesis stories Eden, the sacred tree, the cherub, the serpent, as belonging more to the Egyptian mind than to the Jewish.
And specific texts, too.
Yeah, J.H. Breasted, the famous Egyptologist, maintained the law in Deuteronomy is basically simplified Hammurabic code.
From Mesopotamia. Okay.
Right, but also that Solomon's Proverbs and many Psalms are based on ancient Egyptian literature. Even the word amen at the end of prayers.
Universal in Christian prayers.
Trace back to the Egyptian sun god Amun-Ra.
Wow. Narratives, laws, prayers. It seems pervasive. Let's dig into the astro-theologies themselves. This connection between ancient religion and the stars seems absolutely central.
It really is. Tsarion asserts the sky, seen universally as the home of the gods, was the first of all Bibles, pictorially edited.
The sky is the original Bible?
That's the idea. Joseph Seiss called the constellations the primeval Bible. Alvin Kuhn described all written Bibles as just amplifications and elaborations of that original story written across the heavens, later copied onto scrolls.
And Thomas Burgoyne called the great astral Bible of the skies the one true Bible because it couldn't be tampered with.
Exactly. It suggests our sacred stories began as celestial narratives, star myths.
And these star myths weren't just vague stories, were they? They were tied to very specific symbols used by different ancient cults?
Precisely. The source breaks it down.
Okay.
The stellar cult focused on stars. Their symbols were the star itself, the serpent, the sacred tree, dove, stag, goat, dog, bell, the primordial mount.
And a whole constellation of symbols.
Then the solar cult focused on the sun disk, ram, sycamore tree.
The simpler.
The lunar cult for the moon. Lunar disk, crescent, cow, unicorn, owl.
Okay, I see the pattern.
And finally the Saturnian cult, which seems distinct.
Oh.
The cross, the color black, the square or cube, standing stones or monoliths, and the tower.
The cross associated with Saturn. That's interesting.
It is. And Tsarion argues that later, corrupt religion and classic fable obscured and perverted the original meanings of all these symbols. He insists the priests of the major solar cults were top-notch astronomers.
Astronomers first, theologians second.
Or perhaps the two were inseparable. Their theologies were originally astro-theologies.
Okay, building on that, let's look at divination tools. Things like tarot cards. Do they also trace back to these stellar astronomical cults?
That's the connection made.
Yeah.
Tsarion cites Jean-Baptiste Petois, who described finding 22 frescoes in a secret underground gallery near the Great Sphinx.
22, like the major arcana.
Exactly. Identical to the tarot's major arcana, Petois claimed. He describes Sphinx motifs everywhere, crystal lamps shaped like sphinxes, Arcanum 10, Wheel of Fortune, and 21, the World, featuring sphinxes or zodiac signs.
Wow.
Even the rose cross symbol, supposedly worn by initiates, had the 4 sphinx signs representing the 4 fixed zodiac signs around the central rose. And remains of original tarot designs are supposedly still visible in ruins at Thebes.
So the tarot, often seen today as maybe just fortune-telling, is presented here as having these incredibly deep, ancient, sacred Egyptian roots.
That's the argument. A tool for symbolic literacy originating in temples.
You mentioned the chief symbols of the stellar cult were the star and the serpent. Let's talk more about the serpent. It's often seen negatively in Judeo-Christianity.
Right, but here it's presented differently. The source points to Jesus' advice. Be ye therefore wise as serpents.
That's true.
It also notes the Egyptian hieroglyph for woman was the serpent, and in the Near East, the primordial serpent was often feminine.
suggesting a link to the feminine divine or matriarchy.
Possibly matriarchy, though the source suggests a deeper psycho-spiritual meaning too. Joseph Campbell noted pre-Homeric myths often had a goddess with a serpent consort. Tsarion links the Egyptian serpent goddess Ranat and the constellation Draco, the dragon, as the heavenly serpent.
A symbol of wisdom, the feminine, the celestial. And this knowledge of stars and constellations, it's not just ancient history, is it? The source claims it's still used today.
In plain sight, yeah. It speculates that major world capitals, London, Paris, Washington, D.C., Vatican City, are deliberately aligned to stars and constellations.
Designed like ancient capitals.
In a similar way, yeah. Linking it to Masonic architects and their knowledge of constellational dynamics. The suggestions that powerful institutions still operate based on sidereal phenomena, star-based timings, and alignments.
A hidden layer of astrological planning in modern power structures.
That's the provocative idea put forward.
Okay, this feels like a natural point to turn to something crucial in Tsarion's argument. The suppression or repression of the feminine principle. This seems tied into that shift away from stellar and lunar cults.
Absolutely. He argues that during the time of the stellar cults, women held significant power, senior positions in society, religion, and government.
They were leaders.
Yes, and seen as personifications of major stars and constellations. They might have had the highest status in ancient occult societies.
And the female body itself was key.
The female gestation cycle, specifically, presented as what first awakened humans to the universe's mathematical order, drawing attention to the rhythms of the night sky. The sky itself was seen as the goddess's body.
So female biology was a key to cosmic understanding. How did that change? Why was it suppressed?
The source cites Erich Neumann, who wrote about how patriarchal consciousness, focused on the sun, tends to view the moon spirit associated with the feminine negatively. As regression, the terrible mother, a witch.
Demonizing the feminine and lunar association.
Right. Tsarion points again to the Uraeus serpent on pharaoh's crowns, originally a goddess emblem. The hieroglyph for woman being a serpent. He argues the Kabbalistic tree of life, with its serpent, comes from Egypt, not Judaism, and its central path is actually assigned to the female principle.
So a reinterpretation and suppression happened later. What were the consequences?
Profound and destructive, according to this analysis. Gerald Massey described as a shift from a matriarchal first creation to a male supremacist second creation, where woman comes from man. Reflected, he says, in the doom pronounced upon the woman in Genesis for eating the fruit.
And this connects to violence and societal issues.
Yes. Mary Esther Harding, a Jungian analyst, is cited tracing man's penchant for brutality back to the rise of solar cultism, which coincided with male priesthoods and accumulating private property.
A link between patriarchy, solar worship, property, and violence.
That's the connection drawn. And Leonard Schlein makes that stark claim. There were no religious wars in the ancient world before monotheism.
No religious wars before monotheism. That's huge, if true.
It is. He notes that by the 5th century AD, hundreds of goddess sects were pretty much wiped out, and women were barred from leading major Western sacraments. The source calls it a relentless desire to crush the female essence, human and divine.
Deeply unsettling. And this critique extends to the very nature of the monotheistic God, suggesting a link to, well, psychopathy.
Yes, the source doesn't mince words. It argues the Old Testament provides a ghastly record of inhuman acts performed by Jehovah. Cites Kersey Graves questioning if God created man just to torment him. Quotes Mikhail Bakunin calling Jehovah jealous, vain, ferocious, unjust, bloodthirsty, despotic.
A very harsh critique.
Extremely. It lists numerous biblical verses presented as examples of divine wrath and violence, God as a man of war, furious, vengeful.
And this is contrasted with earlier traditions.
Sharply. Under the Humanists and Druids, women supposedly held high office. But under the later solar and Saturnian cults, they were demoted. Their status as initiators and keepers of the mysteries lost.
Citing biblical verses to support that.
Yeah, like 1 Corinthians, I suffer not a woman to speak in church. And the traditional Jewish daily prayer, thanking God for not making one a woman.
And the Virgin Mary.
Her relatively late acceptance as the Saint Council of Ephesus, 431 AD, and the rise of Mariolatry, are presented almost as a calculated policy decision, a way to sort of superficially rectify the imbalance rather than a genuine return to honoring the feminine divine.
Okay, so that sets the stage for what Tsarion calls the grand deception. A key part of this is his critique of Judeo-Christianity for promoting what he terms anti-natural doctrine.
Right. He argues that the Christian is taught to negate or deny the importance of the natural world,
To see it as separate, maybe even lesser.
and to feel spiritually superior for championing this anti-naturalism. A
Oh.
doctrine, he says, was formally ratified at the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD.
The same council that elevated Mary. Interesting timing.
It is, and he argues this anti-natural stance directly leads to suppressing and denigrating the female sex, and men repressing their own feminine quality.
With broader consequences.
He connects it to humanity's biggest philosophical mistakes, causing estrangement from the self, making man bestial and predatory. He explicitly links historical atrocities to this Jewish and Christian antipathy toward nature.
Wow. And the concept of sin is central here.
Seems so. Leonard Schlein is cited again, pointing out that ancient polytheistic cultures, Egyptians, Babylonians, Greeks, Romans, didn't even have a word for sin. The Israelites, he says, introduced both the word and the concept.
Which creates a sense of inherent flaw, perhaps. Alienation.
That's the implication. W. Winwood Reed's image of ancient priests reeking with gore, and Godfrey Higgins's talk of pious fraud, also suggest a manipulated sense of guilt and obligation.
And Alvin Boyd Kuhn connected this to asceticism.
Yes. Kuhn, in The Ultimate Canon of Knowledge, traced the idea of the malignancy of matter, that the physical world is evil, back to Hinduism and Zoroastrianism.
Not originally Jewish or Christian, then.
No, but influential. It led, he said, to this monstrous cult of asceticism, crushing natural instincts, people fleeing cities for caves to mortify the flesh.
And this alienation persists.
Caitlin Matthews is cited, talking about modern Westerners exiled from nature. Disconnected from the environment, eating processed food, media overload, losing a sense of the sacred, all contributing to this anti-natural view.
It's a profound critique. Tsarion then poses that really challenging question. What if the leaders, the lords and masters, are themselves insane?
Yeah, it's not just rhetorical. He asks, what if they are without reason or respect for life? What if their manufactured world of things ends up consuming what's left of their humanity?
And he sees this as a direct result of these irrational doctrines.
Exactly. A consequence of warped thinking embedded in the dominant religious ideology. It's a stark warning about where these beliefs might lead.
To understand this critique fully, we need to look closer at Alvin Boyd Kuhn, whom Tsarion clearly regards very highly.
Immensely so. He calls him one of the greatest scholars on this topic of Christianity's regrettable anti-natural ideology.
What were Kuhn's key contributions, according to Tsarion?
The source lists several key areas. Kuhn is credited with the first true interpretation of the Christian Bible.
How?
By discovering the alphabet of symbolism, clearing away centuries of literalist misinterpretation. He argued Bibles are allegorical, mythical, symbolic sagas, not history books.
Okay, that's fundamental.
He demonstrated Christianity wasn't new, but a development of Egyptian material. He was supposedly the first to truly interpret the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and he made the sensational discovery that ancient alphabets weren't just letters but divine ideograms, symbols packed with meaning.
So he's decoding a lost language of symbols hidden within scripture and ancient texts.
Precisely. And crucially, he transposed the meaning of scriptures away from external historical events.
Towards internal human experience.
Exactly. Toward the inner world of man's subjective consciousness. For Kuhn, the fall of man wasn't a historical mistake.
What was it then?
A symbol for the soul's normal, natural descent into body. Part of the process of incarnation, not a punishment.
And death in the Bible.
Refers to the soul's condition while incarnated dead or dormant in the body.
Yeah.
And hell, Hades, Amenta,
Yes.
is actually this good earth. We, in our physical forms, are the shades of the dead, spiritually speaking.
Wow. That flips everything. So this life is the underworld passage.
That's Kuhn's interpretation. He revitalized the science of analogy, seeing nature as full of truth, and aimed to reconstruct the one primeval true religion for universal understanding.
A complete paradigm shift. What did he say about spirit and matter then? This seems key to refuting anti-naturalism.
Kuhn argued that if spirit is everywhere, then matter must ultimately be a manifestation of spirit. The soul isn't trapped by matter.
So the problem isn't the body or the world.
No, man's degraded state is mental. The body is the temple of the soul. He believes spirit's power is integrating if it be turned into earth, directly challenging religions that scorn the physical world.
And ancient theology understood this blend.
Perfectly, according to Kuhn. Ancient theology blended material and spiritual. Paganism idealized the deific constitution of nature.
Contrasting sharply with.
With the Christian murder of Great Pan, that severing of the connection between humanity and nature, which Kuhn believed led to an obtuseness and insensibility toward the natural world, and ultimately ruthless wantonness in exploiting it.
This perfectly sets up the next key idea, the distinction between esoteric, hidden, and exoteric public knowledge. This seems core to the grand deception.
Absolutely. It's presented like that temple metaphor, an inner and an outer court.
Where most people stay outside.
Right. The average shopper, as the source puts it, stays in the outer court, oblivious to the deeper, arcane body of knowledge. Inside knowledge, often appropriated from the very pagan cultures they're taught to reject.
Unaware of coded meanings.
Expertly conditioned to accept scriptures literally, missing the symbolism. Dr. Lawrence Buck is cited on early Christianity's Disciplina Arcani, the discipline of the secret. St. Gregory warning against revealing mysteries to outsiders.
And Rabbi Maimonides
Quoted saying, "The more absurd the literal text, the deeper the spiritual wisdom hidden within," calling the literal reader the greatest fool and simpleton.
So the absurdity is a pointer, a test.
Perhaps it suggests a deliberate veil.
Yeah.
But why use symbolism at all? Was it just to hide things? Not entirely, according to the source. Ancient adepts used it to convey truths that could not and should not be grasped purely intellectually.
Beyond logic.
Yes, and because esoteric truths are often resisted by those unprepared, symbolism engages the whole person, not just the intellect, like telling a story instead of just stating facts.
Jesus used parables for this reason.
That's the connection made, citing Matthew. "Therefore speak I to them in parables, because they seeing see not. And I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world."
A way to transmit deep truths indirectly.
Alvin Kuhn put it bluntly, the Bibles were written in a language the very existence of which has hardly been known. The language of symbolism.
Okay, so symbolism was a profound tool. But then something went wrong. Tsarion talks about the madness of later mythmongers turning these symbolic astro-theological themes into literal history.
Yes, he argues they took these rich symbolic narratives and flattened them into physical biographies and historical accounts.
And then denied they were myths.
That's the irony, he points out. Compounded their folly by sanctimoniously and ironically denigrated myth. Albert Churchward is cited again, saying Hebrew writings were originally Egyptian wisdom, but masked and in disguise, converted into history.
And Evalentia Straighton
Said Egyptian myths were torn to bits, trying to make history out of them. A fundamental misreading or deliberate alteration.
Deliberate being the key word here. Was it just a mistake or intentional?
Tsarion's view is clear. The biblical mythmongers knew their histories weren't literally true. They refused to divulge the truth about their debt to paganism and the older stellar canon.
And modern scholars support this view of invention.
He cites Burton Mack calling the Christian Bible a masterpiece of invention. Freak and Gandhi concluding it's a Jewish reworking of ancient pagan myths, not biography.
And there are textual issues, too.
Ernest Busenbark is mentioned, pointing to discrepancies in the Gospels, the lack of verifiable first-century documents, plus the historical resistance by the Church to publishing things like the Dead Sea Scrolls or Gnostic texts.
And persecuting translators like Wycliffe and Tyndale.
Exactly. Presented as part of a pattern of keeping the true, perhaps symbolic or pagan-derived content away from ordinary people.
Okay, let's get even more specific. This pattern of alleged fabrication and borrowing, can we look at some key biblical stories, starting with the creation story in Genesis?
Right. The source claims the whole structure, 6 days of creation, rest on the 7th, creation happening via the word, comes directly from Egyptian mystical tradition.
Specific.
From the god Ptah. He creates through divine utterance, one of his titles being, "Let the world exist." It challenges the uniqueness of Genesis 1 right away.
And Adam himself, the first man.
Described as being based on the Egyptian god Adam, or Adam-Ra, who is Ptah's son.
Okay. And the Bible talks about 2 Adams, or at least Adam having Lilith before Eve in some traditions. Does that connect?
Yes, the source links the 2 Adams motif to Adam Horus and Adam Ra, symbolizing the soul in 2 states, in matter and in spirit.
And Jehovah, the name of God.
Portrayed as a composite figure derived from the 7 Elohim, who are said to be the 7 helpers of Ptah in Egyptian lore, known as the Ali, Eli, or Ari.
So even the core divine figures are presented as composites from Egypt. What about other iconic elements, like the trees in Eden or the Eucharist?
Tree worship, the source notes, was a global phenomenon. It even suggests the divine names Jehovah, Yahweh Elohim derived from tree words, citing Gaelic du for God and leaf.
Interesting linguistic link.
It points to Greek depictions of triform trees representing God, with primal parents figures like Dionysus and Minerva as prefiguring Adam and Eve, and a Babylonian seal showing a pre-Christian scene. Primal parents, a serpent, a phallic tree.
And the serpent.
Presented as a feminine initiation symbol, linked to ancient goddesses like Aft, Tort, Wedjat, Rananut, not inherently evil.
Okay, and the Eucharist, the Last Supper.
Gerald Massey is cited arguing forcefully it did not originate with Christians or Jews.
Where did it come from, then?
He provides evidence that many cultures had sacramental meals long before, often involving consuming the symbolic body of the female in a kind of primordial Eucharist, sharing divinity or strength, an ancient, widespread ritual later adapted by Christianity.
That's a radical reinterpretation of such a central rite. What about something as fundamental as the Lord's Prayer?
The claim there is equally startling. It was simply re-scripted from ancient sources of Egypt and elsewhere.
Rescripted. From where specifically?
From the Maxims of Ani, an ancient Egyptian wisdom text by Anti the Scribe.
And there are direct parallels.
The source provides excerpts. Lines about respecting God's house, praying humbly with the sincere heart so God listens, acknowledging God as the giver of life. Even advice like not disputing mysteries or being harsh with women all find echoes in Ani's maxims.
It really sounds like direct borrowing of moral and spiritual teachings.
That's the argument presented, yeah.
What other well-known biblical elements are claimed to be borrowed?
Well, the Psalms of Solomon are compared to the poetry of Imhotep, the Egyptian genius, the Ten Commandments.
Yes. Foundational to law and ethics.
Presented as a condensed version of the 42 negative confessions from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where the deceased declares innocence of various sins before the gods.
So a moral code derived from Egyptian funerary rites.
That's the suggestion. Phrases like, "Come unto me, ye who are heavy laden," attributed to Jesus, said to be found inscribed in Egyptian temples.
Already existing.
The Exodus story, the 10 plagues,
Right.
linked to the Tempest Stella, an Egyptian inscription describing a massive natural disaster that sounds similar.
Okay.
The raising of Lazarus, paralleled with earlier resurrection myths, and miracles in general.
Like healing the blind.
Jesus' healing with spittle in John 9 is directly compared to the Roman Emperor Vespasian doing the same, recorded by Tacitus.
A Roman emperor performing a similar miracle.
Moses parting the waves is paralleled with Poseidon doing something similar in Homer's Iliad, and it notes figures like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great were also said to have performed miracles. It undermines the uniqueness claimed for biblical miracles.
Definitely challenges that idea of unique divine power. Now, let's tackle the central Christian symbol, the cross. What are its origins, according to Tsarion?
He claims it wasn't formally adopted as the primary symbol of man on a cross until the 6th Synod of Constantinople, citing Stephen Knapp.
What was the symbol before?
Often a lamb, for instance, under Emperor Justinian II. But the cross symbol itself, used widely long before Christianity.
By whom?
By adepts of the stellar cult, the star worshippers, and by Irish Druids, signifying deities like Isa or Isis. The Amorites use a T-shape for their god Tammuz.
Tiver Tammuz.
Right, and the original Greek word for the instrument of crucifixion, staros, just meant an upright pole, no crossbar, often depicted with a serpent, symbolizing Aryan priesthoods or serpent sisterhood.
So the symbol had a long pre-Christian history with very different meanings. Is there evidence for this widespread use?
Oh, tons, according to the source. Found all over the British Isles, used by Druids in Ireland, Britain, Europe. Iona supposedly had 360 pagan crosses.
Limiting crosses.
Yes. Sites like Callanish, Newgrange, Douth, Wayland Smith's Cave, described as cruciform, cross-shaped from pre-Christian times. Even Indian pagodas were often cross-shaped.
And in Egypt?
Joseph Seiss notes Egyptian gods holding the Tau cross, the Ankh, symbol of life. Arthur Dyat Thompson described Osiris as being symbolically stretched on the immense cross, formed by the meridian and equator lines in the sky, an astronomical cross.
So astronomical and life symbols primarily.
Tony Bushby confirms the cross for general Christian use wasn't ratified until 680 AD at that Sixth Council, and didn't really show up in art until the 8th or 9th century. Jewish Encyclopedia agrees it became Christian only around the 2nd century.
And missionaries found it elsewhere.
Frank Higgins noted Jesuits in China and Japan finding crosses and swastikas everywhere, long predating Christian contact, tracing them back to ancient Aryan migrations.
And Golgotha, the crucifixion site.
Skull Hill, presented cryptically as representing Capricorn, The zodiac sign, where the sun appears to stop dead for 3 days at the winter solstice. The symbolic death of the solar hero before rebirth.
An astrological interpretation of the crucifixion site itself. Okay, let's look at baptism and water symbolism, also central to Christianity. Pre-Christian roots there too.
Definitely. Highlighted as originating in Egypt thousands of years before Jews or Christians.
How does John the Baptist fit in?
He's connected to figures like the Babylonian fishman god Oannes or Enki, and to the Roman god Janus.
The two-faced god.
Yeah, looking past and future. God of January, which aligns with Aquarius.
Aquarius, the water bearer.
Exactly. The sign associated with baptism, cleansing, purification by water. This connects to the Nile's annual flood, a time of cleansing and rebirth. The purest water was thought to be available in January, Aquarius time.
So astrological and natural cycles underpinning the ritual.
And the fish symbol for Jesus and early Christians, particularly little fishes. Directly linked to the astrological age of Pisces, the fishes, another water sign.
Explaining fish-related stories.
Jesus walking on water, feeding the multitude with 2 fish, all seen through this Piscean age lens. Even the Pope's Ring of the Fisherman and the fish-shaped mitre hat.
Yeah, the pointy...
Linked back to the fish god Dagon of the Amorites. And Jesus getting into a boat, traced to Druidic traditions like Taliesin being set adrift in a boat. Water symbolism everywhere with pre-Christian roots.
Okay, now for the darker stuff. The number 666, the devil. How are these reframed?
666 is presented not as inherently evil, but as a number related to the precession of the equinoxes. A precessional day is about 2,160 years.
And 6 by 6 by 6 is 216.
Exactly. So 2160. It's called the human number or number of man connected to the sun and light, because the sum of 1 to 36 is 666.
Why demonize them?
The clergy allegedly knew its esoteric meaning, linking it to their rivals, ancient astronomers, and sacred architects who used these numbers, so they demonized it.
And hellfire, damnation.
Said to derive straight from Egyptian traditions. Joe Massey quoted again. The hellfire of Christian theology is a survival of Egyptian mystery rites, where Osiris passes through fire to avoid annihilation.
A trial by fire, not eternal punishment initially.
That's the idea. Egyptian evil ones were figures like Apophis the serpent demon or Set, god of chaos. But Set's fall, interpreted not as moral evil but an astronomical event.
How so?
Ursa Minor becoming inaccurate for calculating the year's length. Set, associated with Ursa Minor, fell from importance astronomically. Later, he got linked with Saturn Father Time, the Reaper, guarding Eden with a flaming sword, the sun's rays.
So astronomical events personified and later demonized.
And the idea of the archaic snake is purely evil, called the creation of theological fancy, fabricated, not original.
This reframing extends to the Garden of Eden story too. The forbidden fruit, the 2 trees, which seems, as you said, preposterous, literally.
Tsarion interprets it symbolically. The forbidden fruit was certainly not fruit, and that the tree was not a tree.
What were they then?
The tree is the celestial tree, the world tree, the polar axis stretching between heaven and earth. Its fruits, the golden apples, are the circumpolar stars, the ones that never set.
And the serpent guarding it
is the constellation Draco the dragon, which coils around the celestial pole.
So the forbidden knowledge is...
accessing the mystery school of the heavens, the college of the stars, essentially astrology knowledge with the power to transform ordinary people intellectually and spiritually.
And the patriarchs block this.
Tsarion claims they prevent this advancement by replacing knowledge with faith, keeping people from eating the fruit of celestial wisdom.
What about the 2 Marys in the New Testament? Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene. Any symbolism there?
Explained as a common mythological motif. The solar hero with 2 mothers, a divine mother and an earthly one, or 2 aspects of the feminine divine.
Pre-Christian examples.
The 2 ladies of Egypt, the serpent goddesses Widget and Nekhbet on the pharaoh's crown, Isis and Nephthys, the sister goddesses who aided Osiris. He suggests Miriam and Martha in the Gospels, and even Da Vinci's Madonna on the Rocks allude to this duality.
And Mary Magdalene finding the empty tomb.
Interpreted astrologically again. Mary Magdalene represents Virgo, the constellation visible in the eastern sky just before sunrise around the spring equinox, late March.
And the tomb
represents the winter months, when the sun, the solar hero, is dead or hidden. He has risen. It simply means the sun is reborn, new and strong at the equinox.
And a stone rolled away.
Is the Earth itself, moving in its orbit, revealing the sun at the door of the equinox point. A celestial drama played out as a human story.
Okay, after all that deconstruction, let's talk about reconstruction. What does the source present as humanity's true purpose? It mentions the magical work and man as the cosmic mirror.
Yes, This gets back to what it calls the cardinal doctrine of ancient mystery schools, that man was the center of the universe.
Not in an arrogant way, presumably.
No, more like a focal point. As nature's greatest creation, man is the custodian of life, the caretaker. The real magical work isn't external ritual, but internal, self-purification.
And achieving what?
Spiritual androgyny, balancing the inner masculine and feminine. The ultimate goal isn't finding God outside, but to become him, to realize the divinity within.
So self-realization is the path.
Exactly. No external secondary agency like a priest or church can truly enlighten you. Teachers can only point you towards the fountain of knowledge within his own being.
And where is this fountain?
Figuratively, at 0 degrees latitude, 0 degrees longitude within your own consciousness. That still point within is the source of the great river of existence, the well of wisdom, the true grail and elixir of life.
A powerful vision of inner potential. How does this contrast with what Tsarion calls the deviant religions that came later?
He argues they openly and ardently defy and refute this central tenet of the ancients. Their institutions strip man of his humanity by divorcing him from nature, his supreme guide, and directing his focus towards fantastic realms beyond his perception, like an external heaven or hell. This diabolical syllabus, he claims, has led to our present state of decay.
Citing religious texts that demand obedience?
Yeah, quoting Deuteronomy about death for disobeying priests and Martin Luther on rebellion being devilish, a stark contrast to the ancient focus on self-empowerment and inner knowing.
This idea of man as a microcosm connects to architecture too, doesn't it? Ancient temples reflecting the heavens and the human body.
That's right. Temples were built as earthly embodiments of heavenly phenomena, encoding cosmic numbers related to the sun's path through the zodiac, the pole star region, the great year or processional cycle into their dimensions, like the Great Pyramid or Luxor Temple.
And Britain had sophisticated sites influencing Egypt.
That's suggested, yes. Glastonbury's Round Table Complex, with its 7 islands, mirroring Ursa Major, Arthur's Way and Big Dipper. Even Rome's layout supposedly followed ancient English patterns.
So, sacred geometry based on the stars. And Kuhn linked the zodiac itself to the human body.
Yes, in The Lost Light. Zodiac, from Greek zodion, small living image, he called it a graph of man's microcosmic life, mirroring the macrocosmic life of the universe, or God. Man's body is a replica of God's cosmic body. The zodiac is the first of Bibles, a hieroglyphic photograph of the interconnectedness of man and world.
And these principles are still subtly influencing modern city planning.
The source claims so. Modern cities confirm that planners and architects still look to the stars. Major government buildings are often placed near water, rivers, lakes, with gardens and statues echoing pagan designs.
Why near water?
Kuhn noted ancient planners did this too, building temples near water, because symbolically, the soul's life is saved by water, a continuing thread of sacred geography.
So, to wrap this all up, let's come back to that core message about nature as the ultimate guide to truth. How has our relationship with it changed?
Kuhn's argument is central here. Thinking which does not start from and continue in close relation to its foundations in the physical universe must lead to falsity.
Truth is grounded in nature.
Yes. The Greek concept physis, nature, linked truth discovery to studying nature. Nature must be made the criterion of all judgment. Kuhn stresses again, the idea of matter being evil, the malignancy of matter, had no place in true ancient theology.
Their thinking was holistic.
Not sundered and fragmented. Physical was spiritual, spiritual was physical. And that Christian murder of great Pan, the god of nature, caused this profound disconnect, this obtuseness, leading to ruthless wantonness towards the environment.
So ancient wisdom saw humans as part of nature, not above it.
Exactly. They reverenced nature because they understood the reciprocal link between consciousness and matter. Humans were an outgrowth or extension of the natural order.
Explaining animal-headed gods.
Right. Reflecting spirit in everything, not just humans. Ancient Druids and Emonists sought knowledge to walk with spirit here on Earth, not in some afterlife paradise.
In the modern condition,
Is described as terminal. The artificial dehumanized man of today thinks nature is something outside himself due to chronic egoism and subjectivity,
meeting to
a despiritualized world, and ultimately self-destruction, a direct consequence of abandoning that connection to nature and the symbolic wisdom it holds.
Oh, wow. Okay. That was quite a journey we just took through Tsarion's work, a really deep dive.
It really was a lot to unpack.
We've covered his central assertion that the Judeo-Christian narrative isn't unique, that a complex rescripting of much older pagan astro-theological traditions, mainly from Egypt.
Yeah, seeing figures like Abraham and Daniel potentially as astrologers, questioning the Torah's authorship, the church allegedly hiding symbolic meanings.
Especially concerning the feminine principle and our fundamental connection to nature. It's a radical reframing.
It absolutely is. What this source material does is challenge us, challenge you listening, to look past the literal surface.
To see those deeper symbolic astronomical layers woven into stories we thought we knew.
Right, whether it's hidden number codes, the real origins of the cross, the cosmic meaning behind rituals, it just invites a critical look at the narratives we've inherited.
Considering alternative interpretations of history, of faith itself.
Definitely.
So the big question for you listening is, what does this all mean for you? If Tsarion's argument holds any water, if our core beliefs are rooted in these ancient sciences and symbols that were deliberately obscured.
What responsibility might you have to reclaim some of that hidden meaning for yourself?
Yeah. What could it look like to approach your own life, the world, through that ancient lens where spirit is everywhere, nature is sacred, and that magical work is about inner purification and becoming?
This is a profound shift in perspective to consider.
It really is. We definitely encourage you to keep questioning, keep exploring, and maybe discover some of that vast, unfiltered knowledge that the universe and perhaps our ancestors really offer.